Good morning, all. I decided I'm going to do a list of my top five Philip K. Dick novels because I've seen a number of these out on the net, and they tend to pick the same exact books, and I'm not going to. I'm going to pick a couple of books that people seem to think are not quite as good, and I'll give you the reasons why I think they're wrong. Or not wrong, just, I have my own opinion, which is different than most people's. I'm not going to include a couple of books that most people think of as very popular, and I am going to include a couple of books that some of you probably never heard of. So let's just get started. The first book I want to talk about is uh, The Penultimate Truth, which was based on a number of short stories. The first one was called The Defenders, which I believe was published in Worlds of If, and it was about people who are living in sort of an underground silos and bunkers after an apparent nuclear war, and something goes wrong. And one of them has to come up to the surface, even though they're terrified of radiation and these imaginary plagues that they've been told exist by the people who still live on the surface. And they come up and they find out the truth that there are no people living on the surface. There are only robots, and the robots constructed the entire war. It's a fake, and force people underground so they could basically force peace upon the world. And they're not going to let this guy go back down into his quote unquote ant tank because now he knows the truth, and they don't want it getting out to people because they're afraid it'll all start all over again. People will come up and they'll start fighting, and there'll be a real war. So that's an interesting story. The second story it's based on is In the Mold of Yancey, or The Mold of Yancey, I'm sorry, which is about people on Callisto who are propping up this sort of pompous political figure called Talbot Yancey. And it turns out through the events of the story that Talbot Yancey is just a mechanical head and chest taped to a desk, and it's a computer that feeds him what he says, and he gives these like bland speeches. Apparently, Yancey was based on Dwight David Eisenhower, who Philip K. Dick did not like and thought was a demagogue, and that's why Yancey is a demagogue as well. The third story was called The Unreconstructed M, and that had to do with a murder that takes place through the use of an ingenious device called a Gestaltmacher, which is a machine that manufactures clues that point to a specific person. It's programmed to manufacture these clues pointing to a specific person as the culprit. And it lays down clues like fiber and hair and DNA samples and fingerprints, all that will lead to the person it's programmed to frame, basically. And then it melts down. So you can't, cams itself, camouflages itself to look like, a TV set or a radio. Its internal components melt, so you can't figure out who created it or why. Those three elements all come together in The Penultimate Truth, which takes place again in a post-nuclear society, but the war was actually very limited. It did do some damage to both the U.S. and the Soviet Union, but not as much as people think. And there's this whole studio run by this guy named Vern Lindblom that creates these fake city destructs and in very great detail, and they broadcast these down to the people living in what they call ant tanks, who believe what they're doing is real. And mainly what they're doing is manufacturing these robots that they call leadys. And they think that the leadys are soldiers and that they have to manufacture a certain number of them each month to make their quota, or they won't get their supplies that they need to live, rations. And it turns out something goes wrong. One of the chief mechanic of one of the ant tanks dies, and they preserve his body, but now they need to go get an artificial pancreas so they can implant it into him and bring him back to life, because they really need their chief mechanic to run the ant tank. The president of the ant tank is sort of forced to, by coercion, to go up to the surface, even though they're afraid of things like something called the bag plague, which shrinks your skin to like a bag, stink of shrink, which your head shrinks down to the size of a pea. All these are fake. They don't really exist. And of course, the fear of radiation, which there is some, but again, it's not deadly, and it's had several hundred years to dissipate. People actually live on these statewide domains, and they're kind of living in luxury. And the leadys are actually their servants; they're not soldiers. Uh, they're personal servants to these people who are living on these great domains. And this guy, Nicholas St. James, the president of the Tom Mix, which is the ant tank that was affected by the death of its chief mechanic, goes up to the surface and finds out that they've all been lied to. That there was no war, or that there was a war, but it was very short, and it didn't really do that much damage. And now he's got to figure out, uh, what he's going to do. He still has to find this artificial pancreas, and it turns out that all of the artificial organs were long ago, liens were put on them by this horrible character named Stanton Bros, who's a big fat oligarch who it keeps himself alive by transplanting artificial organs into himself every once in a while. And there's some other. I'm not going to go into all the details. There's some plot twists about. There's a a very interesting character named David Lontano, who seems to appear older at some points and younger at other points. He also bears a striking resemblance to Talbot Yancey, and there's a reason for that, which I'm not going to tell you, but it's very interesting. And there's a whole thing about time travel and company that tries to go back in time and fake some artifacts from an alien civilization that was apparently allegedly attacked by American Indians and wiped out, and they want to do this to ruin this guy named Louis Runcible, who runs these apartment buildings for people who come up from the ant tanks, and they're sort of enslaved there, but comfortably. And so they have 3 meals a day and then comforts and so, but they're not allowed to leave, and they're not allowed to go back and tell other people about the truth, because that would upset people. Anyway, it's very interesting. It's very well written. There's a kind of a shock ending, which I really enjoyed. I think it's one of PKD's best novels, and I do not think it deserves the low marks that a lot of people give it. If you think it doesn't make sense, you just haven't read it carefully enough. You need to read it carefully, and then everything makes sense. It's very well constructed. All the pieces fit together if you pay attention. So again, The Penultimate Truth. The next on my list is another one that a lot of people seem to discount or don't even know exists, and that's Lies Incorporated, which is also known as the Unteleported Man. This has also a very interesting publishing history. It was first published as a novella in a magazine. I don't remember which one, but I think it's Worlds of If or Tomorrow. And that version was fairly short and to the point. Later, it was published as an ace double, and with another book, and I don't remember what the other one was, but after that, PKD reread it and decided he wanted to expand a certain section of it. And he wrote 30,000 more words, and they came out in a Berkeley Books edition, which I have a copy of. And there were still a few pages missing, so they just put in a little runner on that section that said this manuscript page is missing. Allegedly, some of those manuscript pages were stolen when his apartment was broken into in 1974. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I do know that later, after his death in March of 1982, some of this deleted material was found in the Philip K. Dick archives in Fullerton, California, and re-added into the novel, which is now known as Lies Inc. or Lies Incorporated, which is a much expanded version, and which I like a lot better than even the Berkeley edition of The Unteleported Man. It's basically about this guy named Rockmail Ben Applebaum, who is the owner of his father's failed interstellar shipping business called Applebaum Enterprises, and he only owns one remaining asset because he's been trying to pay off his father's creditors, which are numerous, and the only thing he has left is the spaceship called the Omphalos, which is Greek for naval, not naval as in Navy, naval as in your navel, your belly button. And he has hidden this ship away, and he's being pursued by this company called Trails of Hoffman Limited. That's obviously a gag from Philip K. Dick on Tales of Hoffman, which are stories by this German character writer called E.T.A. Hoffman, who wrote some very interesting and somewhat silly fantasy stories. And it's also a bit of a reference to the scientist Eric Hoffman, who discovered LSD by accident, apparently. But And the reason it's called LSD 25, it was his 25th experiment, which produced the hallucinogenic version of lysergic acid diethylamine, which we now know as LSD. But anyway, Applebaum is pursued by these people. He's trying to get away. He goes to LIES Inc., which is a private police organization. It stands for Listening Instructional Education Service. Now, what that has to do with anything, I don't know. I just think he just took 4 words that fit into the acronym because he liked it. But he meets this woman named Freya Holm, who, again, is the dark-haired girl who we see in many of PKD's books and is a reference to his dead twin sister, Jane, who died only 4 days after her birth, and which he felt terribly guilty about because basically his mother, they were both born premature, and this is during the Depression. His mother could only really afford to feed one of them, and since Phil was the larger one, she fed him more, and he survived, and Jane didn't. He felt terribly guilty about that for his entire life and felt there was a missing part of him. And you'll see this dark-haired girl show up in almost every one of his novels as a sort of a twin figure or a savior figure. That figured out into his personal life, too, but I'm not going to get into that. Anyway, he meets this character, Freya Holm, who is the personal secretary of this guy, Matson Glazer Holiday, who runs LIES Incorporated. And he tells her that he thinks that the signals they've gotten back from this distant Earth colony called Whale's Mouth, which is located at the great sequence star Fomalhaut in the constellation of Piscis Austrinus, the southern fish, 24 light years from Earth, are fake. And he says he can prove this because if you look at the videos of this time capsule ceremony, quote unquote, where people were sending a time capsule back to Earth that never arrived, and they use an excuse, oh, it was captured by the sun and it burnt up, are exactly the same as the people who were shown first colonizing the colony and celebrating that they just looped the audio track and the video track together and that it's a fake. And after reviewing this material, Holiday agrees. He thinks it is a fake, and so he's going to help Applebaum, even though he's penniless. Basically, he has no credit to his name. All he has is his one asset, the omphalos, which he has hidden at a secret dock at Luna. A number of strange things happen. He meets a pilot named Al Dosker who's going to help him out, and then they're discovered, of course, by Trails of Hoffman and their nefarious president Theodoric Ferry makes him an offer. If you agree not to go outside the solar system, operate only within the 9 planets, then I'll let you have the omphalos. If you don't agree to this, I'm going to take it. I'm going to seize it with. He's going to use his military power. He also has pull with the UN. There's an interesting construct here, particularly given the time that this was written. There's a new nation called Neues Einige Deutschland, which means New United Germany. And it's interesting because the Berlin Wall had actually just gone up when this book was written. So this envisions a period when Germany has come back to power way before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And there's sort of nefarious connections to the Nazi past, and they also control the UN. Interesting, ideas, and it gets into this thing. Raphael van Applebaum is going to take the omphalos, despite the fact that it's going to take him 18 years to get there, even though the thing that ruined him was the invention of teleportation by this German scientist named Dr. Sepp von Einem, which can send you to the colony in 15 minutes. And he can't compete with that. His father couldn't compete with it. He's going to actually physically take the omphalos, which on an 18-year journey to Whale's Mouth, and find out what's going on because he doesn't trust the reports that are coming back. And apparently you can, according to a theory which they call a Theorem 1, you can only go to the colony by teleportation. You can't come back because you would be killed by the compression forces on your body. And that turns out to be a lie. But he wants to find out what's going on at the colony, and nobody has ever complained. Nobody's ever, he figures there have to be malcontents. And maybe there's somebody who wants to come back to Earth, and he'll offer him the chance to come back. He goes there, and almost the minute he sets down on the planet, he's hit by a soldier carrying. He sees what looks like a garrison state, sort of like a Sparta, barracks and a very strange sort of concrete buildings. And he's hit by a soldier carrying an LSD-tipped dart and goes into this wild, insane hallucination about being in this quote-unquote class of weevils, who are people who came to the colony but somehow did not adjust to life on the colony, and they have to go through this constant psychological process. And there's some odd things. If any two of them have the same hallucination, they consider that dangerous and they can order that person killed. And he's afraid that this is going to happen to him. He sees all these weird, strange hallucinations, and including one of Matson Glazer Holiday comes to the planet as well because he also does not believe the propaganda that's being sent back. And he also is, he's actually killed. And then Applebaum sees Glazer as a kind of a monster who eats its own eyes and then grows more of them and eats those as well. That's just completely bizarre. And he's in this class of wheels, which includes several very attractive women who he is attracted to. But, it's really a strange and trippy book. I won't give away the ending for those of you who haven't read it because I really highly recommend it. Again, Lies Inc., also known as The Unteleported Man. So that's my second. The next three are probably ones that a lot of people choose, but again, I think they warrant mentioning. The next one is Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said from 1974. It's significant that it was written in 1974 because this was the same year that PKD had his strange experience, which he refers to just as 2-374, referring to March and February of that year, when he says that a strange occurrence happened to him. He had a tooth extraction. There's a difference between his version and his wife Tessa's version. He says it's wisdom teeth. She said it was just a molar, but it doesn't really matter what tooth he had extracted. He was in a lot of pain. He was given sodium pentothal at the orthodontist, but he was still in pain, so he asked for a pain reliever, and they gave him a prescription for Darvon, which is a fairly strong pain reliever. Now, that sets up that he might already have been a little loopy from the sodium pentothal. But the girl from the pharmacy arrived bringing the Darvon, and she was wearing an ichthys, some of a Christian fish, goldfish, on a necklace around her neck. And he asked her what it was, and she started telling him. And then he says a quote-unquote red gold entity grew out of this, and he was struck in the head by what he refers to as a pink laser beam. He said laser-like beam. He didn't say laser beam. He said laser-like beam that hit him in the head, and he was deluged with this series of images that he said looked like surrealistic paintings, and he couldn't understand what they meant, and went on and on for hours and hours. He referred to this as the quote-unquote Fosgene trip. And then later, several days or weeks later, he started realizing that this had actually included some encoded information. And one of the things that it told him was that his son Christopher had an inguinal hernia, and that he needed to go to the doctor and tell them, quote unquote, the left inguinal sac has popped the hydrocele. Now, what that means is that the testicle had burst through the wall, and this can be fatal in infants. And he took Christopher to the doctor, and they said there's nothing wrong with him. He said, "Doctor, will you please check for this?" And he said that phrase, the left inguinal sac has popped the hydrocele. And the doctor checked for it, and yes, indeed, that had happened. And they saved Christopher's life. How he knew that when he had absolutely no medical training is odd. Anyway, this book, Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said, was written after that. Another thing he had seen was that our version of reality was not real, that the Roman Empire had never fallen, that we were living in what he referred to as the Black Iron Prison, which was a computer-simulated world where things were not as people thought. That happens to a character in this book named Jason Taverner, who is a famous singer, a pop singer, and a TV star. And one day he wakes up and he's living in this police state where there's been a second civil war, and the United States is now controlled by two kind of competing police organizations, the National Guard, the Nats, and the police service, which are the Pols. And they're kind of competing, but they both are very oppressive, and you have to carry a government ID or you'll be thrown into a forced labor camp. Anybody who rebels, and the only people who rebel are basically students, are thrown into these labor camps where they're not killed, but they're worked very hard. And Taverner wakes up one day and nobody recognizes him. They don't recognize him as the TV star, and worse, he has no government-issued ID. So now he's in threat of, he could be thrown into a labor camp. everybody he meets, including his girlfriend, who again is this dark-haired girl character, and some people, this police sympathetic police captain named Felix Buckman, who is the policeman of the title, and his sort of nymphomaniac sister, and she seduces him, and then she dies in a very strange way. She's only her skeleton remains. She's been taking this strange experimental drug, and what they figure out in the book is that the drug itself had caused Jason to be transferred into a reality where nobody knows who he is. That's what caused it. And he assumes the identity of somebody named Jason Taverne, who is actually just a mechanic. But the reason he does this is because Jason Taverne has a police ID, and now he can get around without being prosecuted. Some very strange things happen. Again, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but I think that's one of the best PKD books. Very trippy, very interesting. Flow My Tears, the Policeman said, from 1974. The next two, again, are probably on a lot of people's top five lists, but I really enjoy them. UBIK is one of the strangest things I've ever read in my entire life, and very typical PKD. He claims it's one of his best constructed novels, and I tend to agree. There aren't really very many. In some of his works, there are gaps, even in the ones I mentioned, the Unteleported Man and the Penultimate Truth. There are some gaps of logic that require a bit of a leap of faith. Not in UBIK. UBIK goes straight from, if you can call it straight, because it twists around, it jumps back and forth in time. It takes you on this bizarre journey where people can live in a quote unquote a half-life state where you can talk to dead people on the telephone and have conversations with them. And this guy named Joe Chip, who is the central character, is there's a strange product called UBIK, which again is a play on the word ubiquitous, which means something that's everywhere. And it takes different shapes. Sometimes it's a spray foam, sometimes it's a candy bar, sometimes it's a car company. Sometimes it's something else. But again, I can't really even describe the story for you. It's so bizarre and twisted that Joe Chip is trying to find out if his reality is real, and he doesn't think it is. He thinks that somebody else is controlling it, and he goes through this series of very wild, strange adventures, forward in time, backward in time, into parallel universes where he's a different person or he doesn't exist at all, and eventually, in the end, it turns out the person controlling it is himself, which I think is a very bizarre twist, even for a PKD novel. And my number one is one that won't surprise people if you've heard my previous reviews, but it's The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, which again is one of the strangest books I've ever read. Again, it started out as a novella, which PKD describes. He was watching his uh, little girl play with Barbie dolls that they weren't it wasn't his daughter, it was his wife's daughter from a previous marriage, but was watching her play with her Barbie dolls, and he got this idea, for what if this became like a way of life. Well, in the days of Perky Pat, there are these people who live in what they call quote unquote fluke pits after a nuclear war, and it's a fluke because it's a fluke that they survived the war. There's the Oakland Fluke Pit, and there's the San Rafael Fluke. The people in the Oakland Fluke Pit, the adults, I should say, all play this game called the Days of Perky Pat, where they receive these packages from these creatures called Martian Care Boys, who are sort of giant intelligent centipedes that drop these packages, and they're supposed to use the contents, which include like electrical components, to rebuild civilization. Well, instead, what they're doing is building these layouts that are more and more complex. And one guy will say, "I built a working lawnmower for Pat's lawn." Another one says, "I built a working air conditioner, for Pat's apartment." And they're playing this game endlessly, which I think they played with dice. I can't remember, but and they play it in turns. And they pretend to be Porky Pat or her boyfriend Walt, and they go through different scenarios. And this is what they do with their time because they're bored. And uh, he took that idea and expanded it for the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. The main character, Barney Mayerson, works for Perky Pat Layouts, Incorporated in New York, and he's a quote unquote prefash consultant. He is a precognitive who can foresee what fashions are going to be popular in the Perky Pat universe. This is important because now what they use it for is there are colonists. The Earth has become almost unlivable. It's so unbearably hot that if you go out for like a second, you'll get a deadly sunburn. And so people go to Mars and to Proxima and other colonies, but they're living these kind of miserable lives where they have to, do basic farming tasks, and they're just not doing them. They're just like sitting around doing nothing, basically bored. What they do, they take this drug called CAN-D, that's CAN-D, and it projects them into, in their minds anyway, into the world of Perky Pat, where they can become Pat or they can become Walter, one of the other characters in the Perky Pat universe. And so what he does is he predicts what the fashions are going to be for any given season, and um, there's some interesting things like his ex-wife is a pottery designer, and she tries to get him to buy some of her pots for Perky Pat layouts, and he rejects them just because he's being mean because he doesn't like her. And I thought that was kind of an interesting character development to show us that this is not necessarily a very nice guy who's the central character, but eventually, this guy Palmer Eldritch comes back from, he had been to the Proxima Centauri system, and he comes back and he crash lands his spaceship on Pluto. The UN rescues him, and he claims he has a new drug called Chew-Z, it's CHEW-Z, where you don't need the Perky Pat layout. In fact, you don't need anything. It's injectable, and once you take it, you don't have to go to the Perky Pat universe. You can go to any universe you care to create. Well, there's a kind of a dark secret to that, and that is you're not creating the universe. Palmer Eldritch is. And the way you can tell who he is in these universes when you're transported into them is that he has these three stigmata. He's got steel teeth, robotic eyes, and a robotic left hand. And as he appears in various scenarios, he always has these three stigmata, quote unquote. Stigmata, of course, referring to the wounds of Christ. But it's a strange thing. This guy Leo Bolero, who's the head of Perky Pat Layouts, is out to get Palmer because if what he says is true about Chew-Z, and if the UN sanctions it, it's going to ruin him. Nobody will need the Perky Pat Layouts anymore, so his business is going to be destroyed. So he has a personal reason for wanting to get rid of Palmer. And he also doesn't trust him. They think maybe it's not Palmer Eldritch who came back from Proxima. Maybe it's an alien that just looks like him. PKD never clarifies that point intentionally. I think he leaves it vague. Somebody asked him once, is Palmer Eldritch a god or a devil or an alien? He says yes. I believe he's all three. So again, you're drawn into this strange world. Marison betrays Bolero because he's supposed to take Chew-Z and a poison at the same time to make it look like Chew-Z is dangerous, and he won't do it. He's afraid of the poison. He's afraid he's actually going to die or actually be injured. So he doesn't do it. So eventually he's fired from Perky Pat Layouts. He decides he's going to go to Mars and become one of these colonists. And then he sees how miserable their lives are and realizes he's made kind of a big mistake. He has a confrontation with Palmer Eldritch. Bolero has a confrontation. Bolero sees a future which we don't know if it's real or not, where he has defeated Palmer Eldritch, and there's a statue of him, and it says, "To the hero, a hero of the Sol system," or a hero has defeated an enemy of the Sol system, referring to Palmer Eldritch, which again refers to the idea that maybe it wasn't Eldritch who came back, maybe it was a malevolent alien of some sort. Very weird, very trippy book, a really good read. Allegedly, this was John Lennon's favorite novel, and he told Philip Dick when he met him that he wrote the song Paperback Writer about that novel and about him. Which I think was very interesting because, again, 99% of PKD's books came out as cheap paperbacks printed by sometimes fly-by-night companies, but often also, legit companies like DAW and Berkeley and Ace Books. So again, those are my top five. The Penultimate Truth, Lies Incorporated. Now, Flow My Tears, The Policeman said, UBIK, and The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. And if you haven't read any of them, I highly recommend all of them, and the rest of PKD's oeuvre, which encompasses 44 novels and more than 120 short stories, and I recommend them all.